fellow Americans, I've said on several occasions that I wouldn't comment about the recent congressional hearings on the Iran-Contra matter until the hearings were over.
I am not, as I said in my statement, at all ashamed of any of the things that I did. I was given a mission.
You think they're telling the truth?
No, not really.
Not the whole truth.
I think they're under oath, so I think they're telling the truth.
They couldn't remember. They all had lobotomies. Then nobody could remember anything.
The Iran-Contra affair is one of the most significant political scandals in the United States during the 1980s, involving secret arms sales to Iran and the illicit funding of Contra rebels in Nicaragua. During the Cold War, the United States aimed to counter Soviet influence globally, often supporting anti-communist regimes and insurgencies. This policy extended to both the Middle East and Central America, where the US sought to prevent the spread of Soviet-aligned ideologies. In the 1980s, the Middle East was a focal point of international conflict. The Iran-Iraq War, lasting from 1980 to 1988, saw two regional powers, Iran and Iraq, embroiled in a brutal conflict. The US had a complex relationship with both nations. What do we mean by that? They simultaneously opposed Iran's Islamic Republic while strategically engaging with it to counterbalance Soviet influence in the region. In Nicaragua, the Sandinista National Liberation Front, FSLN, had overthrown the Somoza dictatorship in 1979. The new Sandinista government implemented Marxist policies and forged alliances with the Soviet Union and Cuba. The Reagan administration back then viewed the Sandinistas as a threat to the US interests and supported the Contras, a coalition of rebel groups fighting to overthrow the Sandinista government. President Ronald Reagan, elected in 1980, prioritized a strong anti-communist stance. However, his administration faced legal and political challenges in executing foreign policy, especially in supporting groups like the Contras, which were controversial due to reports of human rights abuses. In response to concerns about US involvement in Central America, Congress passed the Boland Amendment in the early 1980s, restricting US government assistance to the Contras. This legal constraint forced the Reagan administration to seek alternatives, often coverting methods to support the Contra rebels. Despite an arms embargo, the Reagan administration began selling arms to Iran in 1985, ostensibly to secure the release of American hostages held by Hezbollah in Lebanon, which had ties to Iran. These sales were intended to improve US-Iran relations and facilitate negotiations for hostages. The funds generated from the arms sales to Iran were secretly diverted to support the Contras in Nicaragua. This covert operation bypassed the congressional restrictions imposed by the Boland Amendment, aiming to sustain the anti-Sandinista insurgency. The Iran-Contra affair began to unravel in November 1986 when a Lebanese magazine, Ash-Shira, reported on secret arms sales to Iran. This revelation caught the attention of international media and the US Congress, leading to increased scrutiny. Major American news outlets such as The Washington Post and The New York Times conducted their own investigations, uncovering the clandestine nature of the arms deals and the diversion of funds to the Contras in Nicaragua. On November 25, 1986, President Ronald Reagan and Attorney General Edwin Meese held a press conference, admitting that arms had been sold to Iran, but denying that the purpose was to exchange arms for hostages. This admission confirmed parts of the reports, raising eyebrows for further investigations. In response to the scandal, both the US Senate and House of Representatives established special committees to investigate the affair. The Senate Selected Committee on Secret Military Assistance to Iran and the Nicaraguan opposition was chaired by Senator Daniel Inouye, and the House Selected Committee to investigate covert arms transactions with Iran was chaired by Representative Lee Hamilton, aiming at conducting thorough investigations. President Reagan also established a special review board known as the Tower Commission, named after its chairman, former Senator John Tower. the Tower Commission was tasked with investigating the actions of the National Security Council and its staff, particularly focusing on the roles of key figures like National Security Advisor John Poindexter and Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, a member of the National Security Council staff, emerged as a central figure in the scandal. North had been responsible for coordinating the arms sales to Iran and managing the funds diverted to the Contras. During the televised congressional hearings, North's testimony captivated the American public. He defended his actions as patriotic and in line with the administration's goals, but admitted to shredding documents and lying to Congress. National Security Advisor John Poindexter was also heavily implicated. Poindexter admitted to authorizing the diversion of funds from the arms sales to support the Contras, and also claimed he had not informed President Reagan to protect him from political fallout. Poindexter's actions were seen as a direct violation of the Boland Amendment and congressional oversight. Several key figures were indicted and convicted as a result of the investigations. Oliver North was convicted on charges of obstructing Congress, destroying documents, and accepting an illegal gratuity. However, his convictions were later overturned on appeal due to concerns about the use of immunized testimony. Also found guilty of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and making false statements. His convictions were also overturned on appeal for similar reasons. Caspar Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, was indicted on charges of lying to the Independent Council, but was later pardoned by President George H.H. Bush before his trial began. On Christmas Eve 1992, President George A.W. Bush pardoned 6 individuals involved in the Iran-Contra affair, including Caspar Weinberger. These pardons were controversial and seen by some as an attempt to close the book on the scandal without full accountability. The Iran-Contra affair indeed caused a dent in the Reagan administration's credibility. Although President Reagan claimed he had not been fully aware of the details, the scandal raised serious questions about his management style and the extent of his knowledge. The affair also highlighted weaknesses in the oversight and accountability mechanisms within the US government. The Commission's mandate was to examine the role and functioning of the NSC, the decision-making processes leading to the arms sales to Iran, and the diversion of funds to the Contras. It sought to identify weaknesses and failures within the NSC and provide recommendations to prevent such incidents in the future. After the Commission released its report on February 26, 1987, it found that the NSC had operated with insufficient oversight and control, allowing individuals within the NSC, particularly Oliver North, to conduct unauthorized activities. The report criticized President Reagan for failing to adequately oversee and manage his staff, highlighting a lack of clarity in communication and decision-making within the administration. It identified key figures like National Security Advisor John Poindexter and Oliver North as central players in the affair. The report emphasized the need for clearer lines of authority and communication within the NSC and between the NSC and the President. It suggested that the National Security Advisor should have a more defined role and should ensure that all significant actions are communicated to the President. Additionally, the Commission called for better documentation and record-keeping practices to ensure transparency and accountability, providing a clear record of decision-making processes and actions taken, recommending enhanced training for NSC staff on legal and ethical standards, which emphasized the importance of adhering to the US laws and policies in conducting foreign policy operations. The US Congress formed 2 special committees, one by the Senate and one by the House of Representatives, to investigate significant scandals. These committees aimed to uncover the extent of the operations, identify those responsible, and recommend preventive measures. The Senate committee, chaired by Senator Daniel Inouye, with key members Senators Warren Rudman and George Mitchell, examined the decision-making behind the arms sales, the diversion of funds, and the involvement of key Reagan administration figures. Their investigation revealed covert operations managed by the National Security Council, including Oliver North and John Poindexter, conducted with minimal oversight and in violation of laws like the Boland Amendment. They demanded stronger congressional oversight, improved documentation, and clearer communication lines within the executive branch. Meanwhile, the House Committee, led by Representative Lee Hamilton, with members such as Representatives Dick Cheney and Jim Wright, focused on the details of the arms sales to Iran, the involvement of government officials, and the fund diversion to the Contras. They corroborated the Senate Committee's findings, emphasizing the lack of oversight and misleading information provided to Congress. They also recommended enhancing congressional oversight and transparency in the executive branch's covert operations. Both committees held joint public hearings in the summer of 1987, featuring testimonies from key figures like Oliver North and John Poindexter, bringing the scandal into the public eye. Public trust in the government was significantly impacted, reinforcing the need for transparency and adherence to legal standards in the US foreign policy and intelligence operations. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and also support us by subscribing to our channel for more fascinating stuffs. Until next time.